I haven't really woken up until I've had my McDonald's breakfast deal. And I know this is true because before breakfast, I put my phone in the refrigerator and couldn't find the keys that were already in my hand.
Nothing gets the morning going like the first sip of an iced coffee. Get any size and any flavor for 99 cents until 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. McDonald's. I'm loving it.
If you love to be remembered as the person who gives the best birthday gifts, I'm here to tell you that 1-800-Flowers.com is your ultimate birthday gifting destination. 1-800-Flowers has thoughtful and artfully created options that are guaranteed to deliver the best birthday surprise. Shop thousands of unique gifts at 1-800-Flowers.com for exclusive offers and great values. To order today, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/tune-in. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/tune-in.
Please be aware, this episode of What's Up Doc discusses child abuse. Listener discretion is advised. Fiona Doyle was born in 1966 in Dublin. The second of 5 children, she was raised in a terraced house in Dunleary. But this was no ordinary childhood. Daily rapes at the hands of her father, the constant threat of violence and abuse, and a mother not only complicit, but who treated her like the other woman in the marriage, referring to her as her daddy's whore. Fiona Doyle's story is simply horrifying. This is What's Up, Doc? Daddy's whore. So Fiona, thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Fiona, if you could describe your childhood in one word, what would it be?
Horrific.
Obviously, you know, your story has been out in the media, but for those of us might have been living under a rock or mightn't have heard about it, where did Fiona's story start? So talk us through your childhood. What are your earliest memories?
The earliest memory would be my father sitting up in bed where I was told to bring him up a cup of coffee, and he was looking at these deck of cards which had different pictures of different sexual images on the cards. Of course, I was that young, I didn't know what they were doing, but my dad picked one and he says to me, "What do you think they're doing?" And I replied, "Eating a sausage, Dad," where it was a picture of a woman giving a man oral sex. And he sniggered at me and he asked me to do it to him. And I suppose really the worst thing about that is, and the thing that makes me cringe, is the smell of him, the smell of it, the choking. Like I was only little. Now imagine a man putting his privates into your mouth and being hard and holding your head down. He used to force my head up and down on him and stuff like that. So I found and do find all that very difficult to talk about, because it embarrasses me and it makes me feel dirty.
What age were you, Fiona?
I reckon the abuse started when I was 3, 4. But I don't know. It's confusing for me because my mum told me to carry a cup of coffee up the stairs. Would she have told a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to carry the hot cup of coffee upstairs? I don't know. That's where it gets confusing for me. But and I suppose I find it hard to accept that my mother set me up. Mm-hmm. That's what she sent me upstairs for.
And when you say that she set you up, what leads you to believe that? What has happened that has led you to believe that?
Because she did it so many times as I got older, as the abuse was getting worse, the rapes, the violence, everything was getting worse. And my mother, she was a woman that loved to air her control. So she had control over my father
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that you don't do what I say, I'm going to tell what you're doing.
Right.
Now, she did put up with violence. There was violence towards her. But it must sound awful for me to say, but she egged it on. And this is the attitude that we all, myself and my brothers and sisters, have. She would push and push and push till my father hit her.
Mm.
And I know that doesn't sound right, and I know people would feel sorry for my mother because of that, but I don't, and I don't want people to feel sorry for her because that was her power.
Well, no, it sounds like she was trying to evoke a reaction in him, really, doesn't it? Like that's...
Always,
Yeah.
always. And if it wasn't like hitting me or like saying terrible things to me, I remember one time, my nanny had come to visit, and I was about 12 or 13, and my mum and my father were having this blazing row, big huge row, and they involved my nanny. My nanny was sitting in the sitting room, and I remember her getting involved in it, telling my father to calm down and telling my mother to calm down, and I was called in. I remember my father shouting, you tell her that, Fiona, come in here. And I was brought into the sitting room, and my nanny sitting there in the chair, and my father goes, okay, now tell her what you think of her. And he was saying this to my mother, and my mother turned around, she says to me, I hate the breath you draw, and I hate the ground you walk on.
Your own mother said that to you?
Yeah.
And do you think she was, I know, for want of a better word, do you think she was jealous of your father's attention being so directed at you? Like, where do you think her mindset, or what do you think was her mindset? Yeah,
because she treated me. I was never treated as her daughter. I was treated as the threat to her marriage, or the other woman.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, very frequently, I was just called your whore, your father's whore. Get the whore in. Don't go without your whore. Things like that. And she was she'd be so nasty to me. Like, I remember one time, we were all invited to a birthday party. And now we'd never had birthday parties ourselves. We never had a cake. We never had a card. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But my cousins would have birthday parties, and we were invited to this particular birthday party one day, and we were all excited because we were going to get nice things that we never got at home. And my mother and father had a row, and my mother said to my father, well, I'm going and I'm taking the kids to, she was going to her sister's, and she says to my father, and you needn't think I'm taking your whore. So she goes off and takes my brothers and sisters to a party and left me behind my father. And I was crying and upset at the fact, like, why was I left behind? And my father then decides, well, come on, we'll go for a walk. And it sounds loving, you know. It sounds, the way I'm saying it, it sounds as if he was been loving towards me, but it wasn't. He decided then, that was one of the times where he decided we're going to walk to the cemetery, and he'd dig his mother and father's grave, and then he'd have sex with me in the, I say have sex, he raped me in the middle of the trees at the cemetery.
In the cemetery?
Yeah.
Where his mother and father were buried? Yeah.
And I remember first of all when he was digging the grave. And as a child, you're told that your nanny and granddad are looking down on you, and I can really strongly remember standing at the grave, watching him dig them, and in my head I was talking to his mum. I don't remember meeting his mum. I remember meeting his dad, but not his mother. And I remember saying to her in my head, I'm saying, do you see what your son is doing to me? Why can't you stop him? Why aren't you stopping him? And I suppose that's kind of really how immature I was, but desperate for all this. Yeah. I just so wanted all this to stop, because it was all just getting too much for me. I never knew where I stood from one day to another. I never knew if I'd have a beating or not. Or at one time, I remember my money went missing from my mum's purse, and she knew. I think she reckoned it was one of the boys.
Mm-hmm.
I had an older brother and a younger brother, but she decided anyway. Her and my dad were having a row over this, and she told my dad that he wasn't hard enough on us, that he should be beating us. So he went and he got remember those, or you probably won't remember, those old silver Nilfisk hoovers.
Oh yeah.
Well, he took the bar off that and he started to beat us, and we were all huddled together. I remember when it first started, I was on the sofa and Austin kind of thrown himself over me, so he was getting bashed on the back with this bar, and next thing I knew, I was out from under Austin and I was sitting on the ground, and I got the bar into the face, and he split open my eyebrow, and when the blood was seen, then it kind of stopped him.
Mm-hmm.
So they took me to hospital down to St. Michael's in Dunleary, and I got 8 stitches in my eye, and I had a whopper of an eye,
Mm-hmm.
like the biggest black eye ever. And nobody ever said anything.
Nobody ever, questioned it or queried
Yeah.
it, or...
They never asked, "Are you okay? What happened?" No, I was sent to the hospital a couple of times with. I know my mother split my head with a dog chain
Mm-hmm.
off a dog lead. Another time, I remember her beating me with a horsewhip.
Mm-hmm.
And Austin, one time made this poker in school. He was doing welding in secondary school, and he was dead proud of this poker he brought home. And then we got beaten with it. So it was.
Even gifts that you brought home were used against
Yeah.
you. Mm.
And my father wouldn't think twice of pulling the architrave off from around the door,
Mm-hmm.
or the skirting board up off a wall
Mm-hmm.
to use to beat you with.
And like you were talking about, the abuse, and you were saying the way you were talking about it, that you were probably making it sound loving. What way was it? I suppose what I mean is that, like, he's this very violent man, but then treats you like you're his favourite. Like, when, after those beatings, how would he be with you? Would he be apologetic? Would he be, how did he reconcile the two sides of himself, I suppose?
I'd be called down. My mother would go to bingo, and I'd be called, "Fiona, come down here and make me a cup of coffee." So I'd be called down, and it would be, my father had this thing about, my father would have specific food for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'd have a turnover. That was a really, really fresh, crispy piece of bread you used to get.
Mm-hmm.
And he wouldn't eat the heel of it. And we would fight. We'd literally fight like animals between ourselves about who was going to get the heel, who bags the heel off my dad's bread. And he would sometimes give me that heel as a reward, or kind of just to be nice to me.
A payoff.
Yeah. Or I used to love his coffee. My dad would have coffee with 3 spoons of sugar in it, and I loved the last bit, the leftovers, because we weren't allowed all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't allowed my dad's bread, we weren't allowed butter, we weren't allowed coffee, biscuits we weren't allowed because they were bought only for my dad, cornflakes, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd either, I remember sometimes they'd go out and I'd take a handful full of cornflakes and just eat them out of my hand. And it sounds like something you'd see on kind of television, like Oliver,
Mm-hmm.
the way all the orphans are scrambling for a bit of food. And that's kind of the way it was. Like, you never knew when you'd get a dinner or what type of dinner. Sometimes I'd be sent to the shop I'd have to do the shopping as well. I'd be the housekeeper and doing the shopping, and I would be sent for a jar of coffee. So I would rob the jar of coffee, and I'd keep the money I was given for the coffee, and I'd buy chips the next day while I went to school in the convent in Dunleary. So I was able to get down to the chipper, and I'd buy chips for myself and Laura, or I'd buy packets of sweets and put them under their pillows in bed. Or sometimes I just buy a bit of meat or a pound of sausages, and I'd go home with it, and I'd say, I found these.
Yeah. Trying to make life a little bit more
Yeah.
bearable, I guess.
Yeah. Trying to give my brothers and sisters, like sometimes they'd need shoes, or they'd need a coat, or they'd need something. So I would just go and rob it. Trying to be, I was trying to be the parent, trying to mind them, actually. And I always watched my sisters. I was always terrified that my dad would do what he's doing to me, to my sisters. So when my dad would say, sometimes during the day, we'd all come in from school, and he'd say to them, right, you lock it out and play. Fiona, you've got ironing to do. Or Fiona, you've got the beds to make. So that was the cue, that was the signal that, well, they were going to go out and he was going to rape me.
And I'm just going back to, because obviously you said one of your first memories when you reckoned you were 3 or 4 was, bringing the coffee up to your father, and then, him forcing you to perform oral sex on him. When did it escalate then? When did it go from, sex acts to rape?
Not long after that. I know I was younger than my communion. And my communion became a big thing in the court case. And it became a big issue because he would only admit his guilt as far back as my communion.
Okay. But you do recall it going back?
It was before that.
Way beyond that.
Yeah. But I remember myself and my husband went to the guards. My father had been interviewed, and he was asked, how old was Fiona when you first started to rape her? And first of all, he was asked, did Fiona says that you raped her as often as having a dinner? And his reply was, no, not at all. Maybe every second day. And then the detective asked him, how old is Fiona when you start raping her? And he said, 7 or 8. And the detective said, how do you know that? And he said, well, I put my 2 fingers inside her and they came out with blood on them.
And I mean, a 7-year-old is not menstruating, no. That's absolutely ludicrous, but he's trying to make it sound better somehow, or lessen it. Yeah, and I was mortified, and I was shocked, and I'm looking at the detective, and I remember thinking, how am I going to hear all these details? How am I going to cope with all this coming out about me? And we left the police station, and we went to the car, and I sat in the car, and I was crying, and I said to Jim, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can go through this. That's terrible, like, the things he's saying are disgusting. And I think I took it on board that it was me, that I was disgusting, rather than the truth of the matter was that he was. It was him. Yeah.
Of course, at that stage I was still feeling guilty and shame and everything.
What is the first recollection of rape that you have?
I think I was a clever little girl. I remember I'd hear my mother going to bingo, and we'd have been sent to bed. My father would then have a blazing fire and his chair right beside the fire, and I would sit on the stairs because I was afraid I'd fall asleep beforehand to keep myself awake. And I'd hear something starting, like I could hear the music to Starsky and Hutch or Charlie's Angels or any of those programs. And if he hadn't caught me first, I'd shout down, Dad, do you want your coffee? And that was me saying to myself, well, if you're going to rape me, you're going to rape me while I can watch something.
Mm-hmm.
So my first recollection would be, you bring in the cup of coffee and you stand and wait until you get told what position he wants you in. So he'll tell you to either go down on your knees and give him oral sex, or he'll tell you to bend over, or he'll tell you to lie on the sofa or lie on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And my first recollection would be being told to lie on the sofa,
Mm-hmm.
and him get on top of me. He would just straightforward sex inside me, but I would be feeling sick. Like I was tiny, and the weight of his body on me was bad. And then I'd be fighting for breath, and then at the same time I get the smell of BO off him.
Mm-hmm.
And my stomach would be turning, and all I could do was just turn my head and watch the television while he had sex, while he took what he wanted, until he finished. And I used to hate it because, I was a child. I didn't realise that, of course, now as an adult, we're all adults, and we're all in sexual relationships, and, we have sex, and we go and shower, and we clean ourselves and stuff like that. But I didn't know that. Nobody told me that as a child. So I'd go back to bed, and I'd be giving out about how wet I felt down below and how uncomfortable it was, and I'd get into bed and I'd feel dirty, but not knowing what to do about it. I was that young.
I remember actually when I read your book, that just reminds me that you said that one of the things your mum would make you do, and that she would absolutely go crazy if you didn't do, was rinse out your underwear.
Our knickers.
And that you reckoned that was to wash away all traces. You reckoned she knew, like, and this was just her way of not having to look at it or deal with it.
Because I remember another thing was I'd get into bed and I'd feel awful, and I'd sleep. I'd turn over onto my side, and I'd put my hands clasped down between my legs like that, and I curl in a ball and I go to sleep. But what I do remember is my mum, she'd come in from bingo, she'd come into the bedroom and she'd lift my duvet to make sure, first of all, that I had no underwear on, because we weren't allowed in bed with our underwear. And secondly, she just, I don't know, just to check me. And none of this, I know it's shocking and it doesn't make sense. I can't make sense of it. But I don't know, maybe she was checking, had my father raped me that night? Is the evidence there? I actually don't know.
Because now as an adult, that is not a normal thing for...
Yeah.
That's not a normal thing. A parent doesn't do that every night.
I've never been to any of my kids' rooms and look under the covers. I know the odd time I've caught my kids sleeping in their clothes. But you'd never think to check, have you got underwear on? And then hit them if they didn't. And then the violence then, say, as you said, when we took off our underwear, if we didn't rinse them. My mother she'd be so specific about it. She'd be sorting out the laundry, and she'd putting the whites together and everything else, and she would count out the pairs of underwear, and she'd know by the sizes about who forgot. Now, I don't remember Christine or Laura being slapped because they forgot to put their pants for wash or forgot to rinse them out, but I did. I'd get a beating for it. And it was strange because it wouldn't make sense for me, because my mother would keep her underwear under her pillow. And I hated that. She'd go up and get my pants from under my pillow and bring them down. So we'd have to go up and get her underwear from under her pillow to bring down for the wash.
But with yours, she didn't want to see any trace evidence, I suppose.
It was shocking. I never knew where that came. I never found out where that came from. But the conclusion that I could come to is the fact, she just didn't want to see any of the evidence there of him having sex with me.
And I mean, you say that that's kind of the first memory you have of rape, but even in your telling of that, it's quite obvious that wasn't the first rape, because you say you stood there and you waited to be told. So, you know, there was obviously a learned habit, even if that's your first memory. You know, you were trained at this point.
Yeah.
You knew what was going to be asked of you, and you knew the kind of routine that was there. What point, or again, do you remember, was it instantly daily rapes, or did it escalate as you got older, or, you know, is there any memory in that regard?
No, I can't say that it was more frequent when I was younger or older. It was just the same. Every day. And the only difference was as I was growing, my schooling, where I went to school, if he thought he wouldn't have access to me that evening, he would come and collect me from school on my lunch break.
To make sure he did.
Yeah. Bring me home, have sex with me, bring me back. And then my mother would know then from the amount of petrol that was in the car whether he'd done that or not. And then there'd be a big row. She's putting the petrol in the car, he's using it to collect his little whore. Why can't she walk home?
Do you ever remember your mum, like obviously you said she referred to you as your father's whore, but do you ever remember her saying the words that, like, you know, I know you're sleeping with her, I know you're... Yeah, so she was fully aware of...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She, one particular time, there was a big row in the house, and she was shouting at my father about, I'm going to tell everybody what you're doing, I'm going to tell everybody you're sleeping with your daughter. And I have a vision of myself, and I'm in my school uniform, and I'm standing in the kitchen, because I was always, the brothers and sisters would be upstairs, I was always involved in the rows. If it's not, Fiona, come down here and make me a cup of coffee, and she'd go, oh, there you go again, bring your little whore down, yeah, get her to make you a cup of coffee. But this particular time, she was shouting at him about sleeping with me, and she said, I'm going to go and phone the police.
Okay.
And I'm standing in the kitchen and I'm listening to her threaten this. And she walks out into the hall, down the hall to the phone, which was on a phone table down by the front door. She picks up the phone and she dials a number, and she says, I want to report my daughter for sleeping with her father.
But that's the mentality.
Yeah. It wasn't I want to report my husband for sleeping with his daughter. None of that. She was reporting me. And I remember I was trembling. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do nothing. I was just standing in that one spot, trembling, thinking, I'm going to be in trouble now. I'm going to be taken off by the guards. My mentality was kind of immature then, because I did think that it was me that was doing something wrong. It's me that will be taken off or kept away or put into a home. I was always being threatened of being put into a home.
And you're talking about yourself standing there in your school uniform. What age do you think you would have been at that point?
12 or 13.
And then, you know, you're obviously in school at the time. Like, you know, who was young Fiona in school? Like, you know...
Yeah. I was quiet, very quiet, withdrawn. I never had anything. My school books would never be paid for. I would never have a good lunch. It'd be slices of bread, if I'm lucky, wrapped in the bread paper. Looking back now, I was pretty smelly, I'd say. Because I, you know, as I said earlier on, like, you wouldn't know about having to wash and stuff like that. So I was the outsider in school. And even when I went into school with that big black eye from the stitches, or not right, withdrawn, that nobody said anything. Never asked me why.
You were never approached by a teacher?
No. And then, like I said, I was taken into hospital then when I was 13 with an STI. and operated on. I was in hospital for 3 days. And
No
nobody,
doctor ever challenged that?
no,
Or
nobody ever said, what's going on with this child?
why does a 13-year-old have an STI?
I was in court. I remember being in the children's court in Dunleary. I robbed a leg of lamb. I only found this out a couple of years ago. I found the file where I had robbed a pound of tea and a leg of lamb. What 10-year-old goes to a shop and robs that?
Mm-hmm.
And the judge asked for an assessment to be done on me. So he must have noticed, he must have thought something was wrong. And the assessment was never done.
They just never followed up on it?
No.
But yeah, as you said, he must have at least suspected abuse, if not sexual abuse, if not rape.
I wouldn't mind, but the place that he had referred to assess me was involved with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I found out many years later that they were involved with us from 1973 to 1983 for 10 years. And they first became involved with us as a family because my parents were foster parents. They used to foster children, babies. And
that is just
shocking.
Beyond belief.
Yeah. And I remember the babies. I remember a baby called Richard, and I loved them. I was the one that cuddled them and fed them their bottles and changed their nappies. And
little did they know they were placing these babies in the house of a
and I do wonder why, because I know one time there was a big argument. My father would go and collect these women, the mothers, unmarried mothers, to come and visit their children. Whether that was a ploy to get his hands on these young vulnerable women, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember it going on.
Yeah.
I do remember him collecting them. And then I remember there was something, one of the babies got very sick and died. I don't know who was to blame, whether it was my parents, a doctor or something, but there was a big rigmarole about it, and then the baby stopped coming. But we continued on with this mental health place, that they continued on being involved in our family.
Mm-hmm.
My mother also would made out that my sister was mentally disturbed. She said that my sister was epileptic and she was having fits.
Mm.
And it was all part of my mother's persona, that she was the hard-working woman, and she had children who were disabled, and she would get disability for my sister.
Mm-hmm.
My mother would go out then trying to fundraise. My sister would go to a special school. My mother would go out and fundraise for this school, go out knocking doors, asking for food, and then keep half the food. But there was an awful lot of dysfunction going on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you were talking there about, the babies coming in and out of the house and how you love them and how you would care for them. How did, young Fiona cope while all of this is going on? So she's bet by her father, bet by her mother, raped daily by her father, an outsider in school. So how did you cope? How did you deal with that as a kid?
I don't know. Like, in the same time, my uncle was abusing me too.
Mm.
I was sent to my auntie's to babysit. My mother got paid for it. I don't know how I coped. I do know it all came to a head when I was about 15. One of the Christmases, the uncle was abusing me, and just before that Christmas, I think it was about the October 1982, and I know the dates now because I found the files. I didn't know them when I was writing the book. I had to guess things, but my mother had thrown my father out, big row the night before, and I was on this big debating team in school, and I was so excited. I was captain of the team, and we were going to do this big debate the day after. But this particular night, the night before there was a row, and my mother decided to kick my father out, and she was shouting again as usual, take your whore with you. And I was told, I remember my father coming up the stairs, I was lying in bed, it was late at night, 9, 10 o'clock, and he said, get dressed, you're coming with me. So I did. I put on my school uniform and I left the house that night with him. And he drove up around the mountains. I don't know where. It was pitch dark. He pulled the car over and I was crying. And he pulled the car over and he just flipped the back of my seat down, crawled over and had sex with me there in the car. And then he gets dressed, and it's always, it's strange the way it flipped from 1 minute he's having sex with me and holding me down, and then the next minute it was a flip back, well, we're normal now, okay, Mum, I'm going to bring you to and we'll see if they'll put us up for the night.
Yeah, like nothing had happened.
Yeah. So we drove to these friends. These friends were living in Blackrock. They run the grounds of the Carmelite Lodge in Blackrock.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a caretaker and she worked in the convent. And we went to their house and my father asked, could we stay the night? My mother kicked us out. I remember I was sent to bed. I was put into their door's bed. Now the lodge that they lived in was really, really strange. You walked into the sitting room, you went through the kitchen to get to their daughter's bedroom to get to the toilet as well. And I was told to go on to bed, so I went on to bed, and I don't know if I fell asleep. I know I was crying, and next thing my father comes in and gets undressed and gets into bed with me. Mm-hmm. And this is in the friend's house, and then he starts to have sex with me again. And the next morning, all I can hear is my mother screaming. Where the family, the husband, he went up and got my mother. Because my father had the car and my mother couldn't drive. So he went and got her and came back to his house. He brought them back to his house. And I remember my mother barged into the bedroom and she's screaming, see, I told you all. I told you he was sleeping with her. I knew it. Look at him. And he sits up and he says to her, get out while I get dressed. And she did. She left the bedroom. He got dressed and he went into the sitting room and there was a blazing row. There was this couple and my father and my mother and her shouting, say, I told you he was sleeping with her. And again, I get dressed and I forget the upset that I should have been in school that day and doing the debate. All I was worried about was I'm going to be in trouble again. That I'm going to be put somewhere or I'm going to be left with her. I was terrified of being left with my mother. Mm-hmm. And it was after that. It was that, and after that then, a few weeks later, that family friend, that house, he came and raped me in my own home. I don't know how he knew I'd be on my own. I don't know how he knew it was okay to take the time to rape me up my mother's and father's bedroom. I don't know. I don't know what was set up or...
That was a week after.
It was some time after. Mm-hmm. And it was close. This was getting close to Christmas. And that Christmas, I was allowed to go to the roller disco in Dunleary a couple of weeks before Christmas. And I went down to... Now, I was a teenager, but I was only allowed to go to the kiddies' time. Mm-hmm. And myself and Austin went, and I had met this guy. Must have been around... I think he knew Austin. And he asked me to go up and dance for him. So in roller disco, it meant you could skate around in a circle holding hands. Mm-hmm. That was it. And he asked me would I be there the following week, and I said yes. Now Christmas Day would have been in the middle of that week. And on the build up over the Christmas, my father said, on such and such a day, we're going, I don't know where we were going, but he was making plans. And I got real brave and spoke up. And I said, I'm going to Rudisco that day.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, why? What's so important about that? I said, well, I promised so-and-so I was going to meet him down there. And he went mad. You're not going down there, you little tramp. And I remember why I told him was, and I've never actually said this before, I remember him always saying to me, if ever you get interested in boys or you want to go out with a boy, tell me. Just tell me.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I was doing the right thing, saying, I want to meet this guy to go to roller disco. Like, I was at that age, you know, the age where you start thinking
Getting
about
interested
boys.
in boys. And yeah, sure.
And he started shouting, calling me a whore and everything, and telling me I wasn't going. And I went to bed, and the next morning I got up. My mother was being really nice to me. And I was confused by this because she's never nice to me. And she says to me, you want to go to Rodisco, you go. And I said, really? She said, yeah, you go. Don't mind him. And I ran up the stairs all excited. Austin, come on. We're going to Rodisco, you and I. And Austin says, I've no money. I said, I'll pay for you. Come on. So Austin got dressed, and my father was in bed now, and he was obviously listening to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Myself and Austin got dressed. We walked up the road to get to the bus stop. And I was standing at the bus stop, and because it was Christmas, the buses weren't very frequent. So we were standing there for a while. Next thing, my father pulls up in the car, and he shouts, you tramp, get into the car. I was mortified because there was loads of people at the bus stop. And Austin jumps into the car. He gets in the back. I don't know why I got in the front of the car. I can't remember why I did it. All I remember is him boxing me into the face. And you're a whore. Nothing but a fucking whore going off to meet a fella.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I want to know who this fellow is. And I'm saying, I don't know. You do fucking know. This is not the first time you've done this. And he was beating me that much that I gave him a false address. I just said, he lives over there, and I think his name is so-and-so. What house? And I had to show him a house. It wasn't the house, because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I had to show to stop the beating. But he kept beating me and punched me as we drove back down to the house. And I walk in, and I was crying. And my mother just standing there sniggering at me.
She'd set you up.
Yeah. And my father, get up to your bed. Get up there, you little tramp, you. And he follows me up the stairs and continues on. At this stage now, he was really beating me hard.
Mm-hmm.
And beside my bed was my record player. And I'd only just as well kind of got into music and records, the general teenager stuff. And as he's beating me, he raises a foot and puts it right down in the middle of my record player. And I was devastated. That was my pride and joy. And they had bought me a watch for Christmas as well. And this watch I was looking at in the jewellers for months. I'll never forget it. It was a thick gold band with love hearts engraved all along the band of it. And I couldn't believe that I got this watch for Christmas. And next thing anyway, he snatches the watch off my arm. I only got it 3-4 days beforehand. And as, you know, continuing on calling me a whore, and I'll knock this out of you, you little tramp. And he eventually stopped, and he went off downstairs, and I was crying. And I just had enough. I was lying there in bed thinking, I cannot do this anymore. Your man had come and raped to me weeks before, and my father. And now when I try and just do the normal things that a teenager does, he's calling me all these names and beating me, and I just couldn't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I got out of the bed and I snuck into their bedroom, and I knew there was a load of tablets in the drawer beside my mother's side of the bed, and I took all the tablets. Every one I could find, I just took. I'd had enough. And I got back into bed and I curled up and I was going to sleep, and I remember Austin coming up and he's going, Fiona, are you okay? And I said, no, Austin, I'm done. I've had enough. And I told him I'd taken all these tablets. And he got a fright and he went downstairs and he called my mother. And my mother came up the stairs and she's shouting, Pat, get up here quick. The fucking little bitches have taken all my tablets. And my father comes up the stairs. And my mother's going, we have to get an ambulance. And my father's going, no, we're not. And a fucking ambulance for her. And I think my mother shouts at Austin to go and make some black coffee. In the meantime, I think my father just started hitting me again. My mother's trying to drag me out of the bed. Austin comes up with the coffee and she makes me drink a load of black coffee to make myself sick. Mm-hmm. And she made me sick anyway. And I just got into bed and fell asleep. And next thing I remember was I was being woken that night by my mother and father to go back down to their friends to babysit his daughter while they all went out drinking.
After he raping you the week before? Yeah.
And after me taking the overdose that day, it was like, it never happened. And I just couldn't take anymore. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, in January of that year, so we were going into 1983, and my mother and father announced that we're going to sell up and move to England.
Please join us next time for the concluding part of Fiona's story. I am your host, Gemma Delaney, and this is What's Up, Doc? Daddy's Whore.
Plan ahead this Valentine's Day with 1-800-Flowers.com. From first dibs on great deals to the best selection of Valentine's Day roses and guaranteed delivery. Don't wait to wow. Right now, 1-800-Flowers is offering 24 assorted roses for $39.99. Or upgrade to 24 red roses for $10 more. Get right to the romance this Valentine's and find the way to wow with 1-800-Flowers.com. To order, go to 1-800-Flowers.com/tune in. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/tune in.